This guy, not exactly household name famous, Dr. Cyril Wecht, died just a couple of days ago. This was a great man. He was a pathologist, a medical examiner, like Quincy. And what did he do? Well, he's one of the first credentialed people to take a look at the Warren Commission and say, not true. They got it all wrong. The John F. Kennedy assassination in 1963, you know what the official version was for a long time? Lee Harvey Oswald did it by himself. Well, that held for a bit. And then Cyril Wecht took a big step forward and said the Warren Commission was fundamentally flawed. They got it all wrong. They ignored one of the worst autopsies ever convicted. And the idea that Lee Harvey Oswald did it by himself is absurd. Now, we all know that, but back in the 1960s, that was a pretty radical thing to say. The establishment, they could be wrong, the deep state, but he did it. Dr. Wecht took a big step forward, and with all of his credentials, his reputation, he was a very well-regarded doctor, said, there were two gunmen, at least two gunmen. The speed of the bullets, weight, there's no way this could have been provided by one. And the path of the bullets, he was the one who debunked the so-called magic bullet theory. And, well, he gave birth to an effort to uncover the truth of what really happened. He took some fire for it from time to time, but now it's textbook.
How would you characterize the autopsy performed on President Kennedy?
As one of the most incomplete, superficial, incompetent medical legal autopsies that I have ever seen.
I know today 2 people shot the president and Governor Connally on November 22nd, 1963, because under the single bullet theory alone, having destroyed it, we arrive inevitably, inexorably, and irrefutably to the conclusion that 2 human beings did the shooting on that day.
And a lot of us think those 2 human beings were employed or at least directed by the Central Intelligence Agency. There was a lot of resentment and resistance in the deep state toward John F. Kennedy. The Joint Chiefs of Staff did not like this man. No way. They wanted to go big and hard and early in Vietnam. And they pressed and pressed and pressed for more troops. John F. Kennedy was not sold. And he wasn't sold on the generals. They had let him down a million times. These guys are fine, by the way. I think Curtis LeMay may be one of them. But the overall military-industrial complex did not like JFK. Here's something weird. Did you know that Lyndon Johnson, JFK, of course, and Richard Nixon were all in Dallas the day of the assassination? 3 presidents in Dallas? That's something, huh? And when Lyndon Johnson took the oath for president, right, in Air Force One, it was a solemn picture. It actually was kind of a fake. He automatically became president under the Constitution as soon as JFK died. And historians have since reported that right after this solemn picture, he was happy, shaking hands. People were kissing him. I mean, Jackie went to the back of the plane, but there was a suddenly celebratory mood when Lyndon Johnson was the president. Now, what could have happened here? Under JFK, we only had how many troops in Vietnam? A handful, 16,000 troops. By the time Lyndon Johnson was winding down his presidency, we had more than 500,000 U.S. troops in Vietnam. That's a lot. Look, I don't know what happened, but I do suspect the deep state. You know, the deep state, we learned on this show and through some of our guests, they probably took out Nixon. The whole idea that Bob Woodward and his friend Bernstein, the deep state, the swamp, the military-industrial complex, they were furious that Nixon was kind of creating a détente-type situation with the Soviet Union and reaching out to China. This infuriated them and scared them in ways that I think Donald Trump scares them as well. And what are they going to try to do next to take him out? These fake trials aren't working, that's for sure.
The punches are building cumulatively. I think Tuesday there were bruises and today there's blood, to extend the metaphor.
I think if I was a juror in this case, watching that, I would think this guy's making this up as he's going along.
You think? It took you 6 years to figure that out? Again, we knew all along, but you know what? I'm actually feeling a little bit sorry for Michael Cohen. That's who they're talking about. Michael Cohen could be a victim in all of this. I have very little regard for this guy, don't get me wrong, but yeah, there's something to be said for the pressure they put him under, and maybe he did things that in retrospect he wish he hadn't done. And the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, raided his home, his office. And why did they do that? They did it because he was President Trump's personal attorney. At least that's how he was marketing himself, with President Trump's permission. And that's why the FBI knocked on his door early one morning.
I just heard that they broke into the office of one of my personal attorneys, good man, and it's a disgraceful situation. It's a total witch hunt. I've been saying it for a long time. It's a disgrace. It's frankly a real disgrace. It's an attack on our country in a true sense.
Absolutely. Messing with the president's own attorney. And back to the victim part of this, again, not a good guy, but how would you feel if this happened to you? They were asking Michael Cohen on the witness stand, the prosecutors. I want to direct your attention now to April 9th of 2018. I was raided by the FBI. Can you tell the jury a little bit about that? At 7 o'clock in the morning, there was a knock on the door. I looked through the peephole and I saw a ton of people in the hallway. And so I saw a badge. So I opened the door. They identified themselves as the FBI, asked me to step into the hallway, which I did. I found out that simultaneously they had also, the FBI, raided my apartment that was under construction, my law office, and TD Bank, which had a safety deposit box that I had just opened in order to put valuables in because I didn't want to keep them in the hotel or obviously in the apartment. It was under repair. And did the FBI search those locations for items of yours? They did. And what kinds of things did they seize from you when they executed that search warrant at your hotel room? The search warrant gave them the right to take my 2 cell phones, to take any and all electronic devices, as well as records. They took my 2 cell phones and a series of tax books, as well as other documents. I ultimately found out that they basically packed up much of the documentation that was in my law office and took that out as well. How would that feel for any American citizen? And what was the predicate? That's what they like to say, lawyers, the predicate. What was the reason? Because he was Trump, a Trump associate. That's why they did it. And the media, they never had any problem with this. They should have been fighting this every step of the way like we were. Instead, they were cheering it on.
The New York Times breaking the news in the last few minutes that the FBI has raided the office of Donald Trump's longtime lawyer, Michael Cohen. Cohen has been in the news on 2 fronts in the last week.
FBI raids in New York today at the home and office of the president's personal attorney, Michael Cohen.
The FBI raid on the home and office of Trump attorney Michael Cohen could be the thing that pushes him over the edge.
And that was kind of the point, right? Make Cohen work for the feds, work for the deep state, get Trump. That was the whole thing. Trump, of course, was totally onto it, knew it every step of the way what was happening. They weren't fighting crime. It was all about getting him.
This whole thing about flipping, they call it. I know all about flipping. For 30, 40 years, I've been watching flippers. Everything's wonderful, and then they get 10 years in jail, and they flip on whoever the next highest one is, or as high as you can go. It almost ought to be outlawed. It's not fair.
It's not fair, and it should be outlawed, absolutely. And that's what happened here. They flip, and they tell you what they want to hear to avoid getting in trouble. So they go through all of Mike Cohen's stuff, and what do? They threaten his entire family, including his wife. Yeah, you don't play ball with us, we're going after your wife. Ultimately, Michael Cohen, pled guilty to income tax evasion. How much money? It was a lot. $4 million, they say he did not actually report to the government, and that meant the federal government was out $1.4 million. But again, they threatened his wife. Michael, if you don't sign this thing, we're coming after your wife. And, well, I learned that by going through the transcripts. This is Michael Cohen. Southern District of New York was going to file an 80-page indictment that included my wife, and I elected to protect my family. Question, there was a risk that your loved one, your wife, would be indicted as well? Correct. That's what I was told. Well, who told you that? My lawyer. So did the government ever tell you, did the prosecutors from the Southern District ever say, if you don't plead guilty, we are indicting your wife? That pressure of having your wife indicted and the short time frame with which they had to make a decision was the reason why you pled guilty. Yes, sir. You know, a lot of married couples, of course, file jointly. I could very much see a scenario where the federal government would have gone after his wife, right? These people, they don't mess around, and that should be kind of illegal, I think. Here's one of them, one of MSNBC's favorites, a former federal prosecutor talking about, well, what should be illegal tactics.
The judge will ask in the colloquy, in the exchange with the defendant, has anyone threatened you or promised you something in return for your plea? And some defendants either don't quite understand that question or balk at it. And I've had a defendant actually say to the judge in that circumstance, well, that guy over there pointing at me said he was going to indict me if I didn't plead guilty. And the judge would say in return on that's not a threat, that's a promise.
Yeah. Not funny, and I don't think that's constitutional. Alan Weisselberg is in jail tonight. He's in his late 70s. He's in the most notorious prison in America, right? Targeted because he was Donald Trump's tax attorney. And Pomerantz, Mike Pomerantz, he's a name that's been forgotten in all of this. This guy publicly pressured Alvin Bragg to bring this bogus case, all right? Now, here's how this guy does business. It's amazing what these people write in their own book, but they're proud of it, I guess. Being bullies, maybe that's why they went to go work for the government, huh? Check this out.
Kerry and I also discussed calling Weisselberg's lawyer to fire a warning shot over his bow. We could say that we might be coming after Weisselberg without specifying what we had on him, which was very little at that point, in the hope that he would get scared and fall into our laps as a witness.
How about that? Scaring them, bluffing them. Does that sound like law and order? That sounds like gambling, gamesmanship. That sounds a little bit criminal, quite frankly. All right, so Michael Cohen's credibility was totally and completely obliterated again today by the very skilled defense team of Donald Trump. Take a look at this. Now, they had established, they thought, prosecutors, that why did you need to speak with Mr. Trump at that point in the evening of October 24th? This is back in 2016, to discuss the Stormy Daniels matter and the resolution of it. They make a big deal. They have a record of a phone call from Michael Cohen to one of Donald Trump's aides who's sitting right by him, and he says that he handed Donald Trump the phone, and they talked about the Stormy Daniels situation. Next slide, please. And did you have an understanding about whether during that conversation you resolved that? You were moving forward to fund the deal? Yes. Well, it turns out that's pretty much impossible. They were having a different conversation, not with Donald Trump, but with Donald Trump's chief security aide, a guy named Schiller. Because Cohen, Michael Cohen, who kind of dresses like a 14-year-old boy sometimes, right, in his silly T-shirts and the like, some 14-year-old kid was prank phone calling him, and he called the head of Trump's security to get the kid to stop.
And Cohen has testified he called then-candidate Trump to update him about the transaction. But on Thursday, defense attorney Todd Blanche accused Cohen of lying about the call and instead claimed Cohen was reaching out to Trump's bodyguard to get help because he was receiving harassing phone calls from a 14-year-old prankster. Part of it was the 14-year-old, Cohen testified, saying he discussed the prank calls while also updating Trump about the deal.
Yeah, but we know how long the phone call was. It was like 64 seconds. There was not enough time to... Anyway, gotta love the jerky boys. Wow, case is blowing up. Might be a directed verdict from the judge or not guilty after all from the jury.